Okay, so you want to become a cowboy. The open range, the horse, the herd, the hat. A life lived outdoors with cattle and sky and no cubicle in sight. It's one of the oldest American dreams there is. But here's the strange part. There are two completely different ways to become a cowboy, and they sit at opposite ends of the money spectrum. You can be the cowboy, the hired hand who rides for someone else's brand, or you can own the operation, the ranch and the cattle and the land underneath them. One of those is a modest paycheck. The other is a small fortune. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what each path costs, how the money actually flows on a cattle operation, why the profit per animal is shockingly thin, and why the real cowboys often don't own a single acre of what they ride across. Let's start with the simplest path, getting hired as a working cowboy, or in modern terms, a ranch hand. This is the version most people picture, and the good news is it costs you almost nothing to enter. The bad news is it doesn't pay much either. Ranch hand jobs in cattle country commonly pay somewhere in the range of $40,000 to $48,000 a year, and a big part of the compensation isn't cash at all. Most working ranch positions come with what's called found, meaning the ranch provides housing and covers utilities, often throws in a company truck, and sometimes even gives you part of a butchered beef for your own freezer. A seasoned ranch manager, the person running the whole operation, averages around $60,000 a year. So as a hired cowboy, your economics are straightforward. A modest salary, plus a place to live and a vehicle, in exchange for genuinely hard, physical, weather-beaten work. You're feeding and watering cattle, fixing fence, moving animals between pastures, checking their health, and pulling calves during calving season, which happens whenever nature decides, including the middle of a freezing night. The hours vary enormously with the season, brutal during calving and haying, quieter in the dead of winter. It is not a path to wealth, but it also requires no capital, no land, and no herd. You bring your skill and your willingness to work, and the ranch supplies everything else. This is, and always has been, what the vast majority of actual cowboys are, employees. There's also a well-worn entry ramp that keeps startup costs at zero, leasing. Rather than buying land, many people getting into cattle begin by leasing pasture from an existing landowner, which slashes the biggest upfront expense and lets a newcomer learn the land, the animals, and the seasonal rhythm before sinking a fortune into mistakes. Experienced ranchers almost universally advise starting small and scaling up, because the fastest way to lose money in cattle is to buy more animals and more ground than you understand how to manage. The learning curve is real, and it is unforgiving to anyone who confuses the romance of ranching with the daily reality of it. Now let's talk about the other path, the one where you own the operation, because this is where the real economics of ranching live, and where the dream gets expensive fast. To run your own cattle ranch, you need three big things: land, infrastructure, and the cattle themselves. And each one is a serious expense. Start with land, which is almost always the single largest cost. Ranch land prices vary wildly by region. In the Texas Panhandle, you might find grazing land for under $2,000 an acre, while good Central Texas ranch land can run $7,000 to $10,000 an acre or more. And ranching requires a lot of land, because cattle need room to graze. Depending on how green the country is, a single cow-calf pair might need anywhere from a few acres to dozens of acres of pasture. So even a modest ranch means hundreds of acres, and land alone can easily run into the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Then comes infrastructure, the unglamorous backbone of any ranch. Fencing, water systems, wells, storage tanks, barns, corrals, and cattle handling facilities typically cost somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000 to establish, depending on what's already there. Water is the first thing experienced ranchers build around, because a cow can drink 10 to 20 gallons a day, and without reliable water in every pasture, the land is useless for grazing. Ranchers manage this through techniques like rotational grazing, dividing the land into paddocks, and moving cattle between them so the grass has time to recover, which keeps more animals fed on the same acreage. It's the kind of unglamorous knowledge that separates a ranch that turns a profit from one that overgrazes its land and slowly destroys the very asset it depends on. Then equipment, tractors, trailers, balers, and the basic machinery of ranch work, another $50,000 to $100,000. And none of that is a one-time cost. Machinery breaks and wears out, fences need constant repair, and insurance for the property, the equipment, and liability adds several $1,000s a year on its own. Ongoing operating expenses, feed, fuel, veterinary care, labor, and maintenance run continuously whether or not the cattle market is cooperating, which is why cash flow, not just startup capital, is what sinks so many new ranches. And finally, the cattle. A single cow can cost anywhere from about $800 to $2,000, depending on breed and quality, and prices in recent years have run high. Stock a ranch with even a modest herd, and you're spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars just on the animals. Put it all together: land, infrastructure, equipment, and cattle. And the people who advise new ranchers consistently land on a sobering figure. A medium-sized cattle operation commonly requires around $650,000 in total startup capital, and often far more. Buying a turnkey working ranch with the herd and equipment included can run into the millions. One Western Washington cattle ranch, 453 acres with 175 head of cattle, equipment and buildings included, was listed at $8.8 million. So now you own the ranch. How do you make money? This is where the brutal arithmetic of cattle reveals itself, and it's the single most important thing to understand about the business. A cow-calf operation, the most common model, works like this. You keep a herd of mother cows, breed them, and each year they produce calves. You raise those calves and sell them, typically as weaned calves or yearlings. Your revenue is essentially the calves you sell each year. And here's the problem. The net profit per animal is thin. Estimates for average net profit per head of cattle commonly land somewhere around $50 to $200 after you account for feed, veterinary care, and everything else. Feed alone runs $200 to $500 per cow per year, and that's if you have your own pasture. Buy hay in a drought, and it climbs fast. Think about what that means. If you're netting, say, $150 per animal, you need a very large herd just to generate a meaningful income. 100 head might net you $15,000 in a decent year, against hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in land and cattle. The return on capital in ranching is famously low, which is exactly why so much ranch land is owned by families who inherited it, or by wealthy individuals who treat it as a lifestyle and a long-term land investment rather than a business that pays for itself. That thin margin also swings with forces completely outside your control. Cattle prices rise and fall with market cycles, feed costs spike during droughts, and a single bad winter or disease outbreak can wipe out a year's calves. A rancher can do everything right and still lose money because the market moved or the rain didn't come. This is the fundamental instability of the business. Your costs are relatively fixed, land, feed, labor, but your income depends on cattle prices and weather, neither of which you command. There is, however, a way the numbers start to make more sense, and it's how most serious ranches actually survive. Diversification and scale. Larger operations spread their fixed costs across more animals, which is why ranching consolidates toward big operations over time, and many ranches add other income streams, selling hay, leasing grazing rights, hunting leases on their land, or agritourism. Some raise premium grass-fed or organic beef that commands higher prices. The single-income cow-calf operation living purely off calf sales is the hardest version to sustain. The ranches that thrive usually have more than one way to bring in money from the same land. So let's put it all together and answer the real question. What does it actually cost to become a cowboy? And can you make a living at it? If your dream is to be a cowboy, ride horses, work cattle, live the life, the honest answer is that the cheapest and most reliable way is to get hired. It costs you nothing but effort, pays a modest $40,000 to $60,000 with housing included, and puts you on a horse doing the actual work every single day. You will not get rich, but you will genuinely live the life, and you'll do it on someone else's capital. If your dream is to own the ranch, be prepared for the truth that it's less a job than a major capital investment, often north of $650,000 and frequently in the millions, generating a thin and unpredictable return of maybe $50 to $200 per animal, buffeted by markets and weather you can't control. People who own ranches outright and turn a reliable profit are usually working at large scale, have owned the land for generations, so they're not carrying a mortgage on it, or are wealthy enough that the ranch is partly a passion and partly a bet on land appreciation rather than a business expected to pay its own way. And that's the quiet truth beneath the cowboy dream. The romance and the economics point in opposite directions. The person on the horse, moving the herd at dawn, living the life in its purest form, is very often the hired hand, not the owner. The owner is the one carrying the debt, watching the cattle markets, praying for rain, and doing the math on margins so thin they'd make a city accountant faint. Being a cowboy has never been about the money. It's about a way of living that a certain kind of person will trade almost anything for, including quite often the chance to ever get rich doing it. The land is expensive, the cattle are expensive, the margins are cruel, and still, every year, people choose it anyway. That choice, more than any paycheck, is what the word cowboy has always really meant.